Welcome back, friends. We're talking about education. The Lord taught them the proper role of educators. And so we're talking about the three different societies. We've got the family, we've got civil society, and we've got the church. So we're looking at the three groupings and wanting to find a way for them to be harmonious. So we're into the civil society at this point. So civil society has a very important role in education. And as Sarah rightly said in the last episode, families cannot do it by themselves. And as I was working on this talk, I just happened to come across this video of a prepper. And his main point of this short little video was he was going to follow the behaviors of the pioneers crossing the West using knowledge of 150 to 200 years ago. And it was very, very fascinating because he's proposing to be able to be prepared without having that prepackaged material, and the fact that animals and meat supply would have been erratic and they would have known how to take care of themselves and all of this. So he was going to be solely going about it 150, 200 years ago. And yet, as I watched, I noticed he was wearing modern glasses obtained at his optometrist. And I also noticed that his shirt that he was wearing was a really fine grade of cotton. Somebody had to have grown that cotton, right, spun the fiber, sent it, even if he announced he had handmade clothing, but what do we really mean when we say handmade? Right? So so it's just an aside, you can do it with it. Every so often in our family, we take a moment, a few times a year, it's not particularly often, but it's often enough to, and it's perhaps one of those times where conversation seems to be lagging. How many people did it take to produce X?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And it does whatever strikes your fancy. It's a huge number of people. And then the big point for us is it keeps us tethered to the objective reality that we have need of the other, and it is a profound gratitude that somebody is doing that thing. Just think about turning on the water faucet and how many people are involved with just something that way.
Profound. And I think that we also kind of have a very abridged notion of society and what constitutes the civil society. We generally tend to limit it to our lifetime, right? But that's not actually, in fact, what is true. I mean, obviously, that civil society is most pertinent to us and the one that we're living in. But we have an obligation to, what is Chesterton will talk about the democracy of the dead, right? We have an obligation to be at least generous in our judgments of the people who have gone before us. And we also have to have a humility to recognize that at some point in the future, someone is going to judge us, right? So this civil society does not only extend for the 20 or 40 or 50 years that we are engaged with it actively in terms of educating our children. It actually goes far beyond that. And that's why I do think that we do have to take that temporary pause and recognize that what we call education in America, this concept that children who are, talk about utilitarianism, right? What is the most functional way of dividing up children? Right? The most functional way of dividing up children is to say people who are born between this calendar year and this calendar year all go to this building because you're all roughly the same size. You're all dealing with roughly the same problems. So we're just going to shove you into that one building. And we're going to teach you things that we think everybody your age should know. Okay, well, that is functional for whom? Whose need does that meet? Does that meet the need of the individual student? Or does that meet the need of the state to educate en masse, right? So we've come to accept something in the past 45 years that has never been accepted in the entire history of the world, that people are just educated because they were born in, November of 2005, as opposed to what are you capable of learning? And I think that that's actually one of the things that was also kind of shown to the parents right now, is that some of their kids are really challenged by some of the work that they're being given, that it's too broad-based for them. Or conversely, there are some parents who are like, my kid is literally sitting in front of a screen coloring in green squares. Like, this is way below his ability, and consequently then below his dignity. So we have to be engaged with the civil society, recognize that it preceded us, that it's going to follow us. I often think about the example of the men, those first men who dug the foundation of, say, a Notre Dame cathedral. They had not one lively hope whatsoever of being able to hear the steeple bell rung. But they had faith to believe that if they began a good work, somebody in following generations were going to see it through. And I think that we have to kind of adopt that kind of mentality, that we're not engaged in a short term. We truly are engaged in a long-term process where we're looking for the best good for the most amount of people for the longest amount of time.
That's right. That's right. And a properly run state would exist to safeguard that process, while at the same time providing resources that the family needs but cannot provide for themselves.
Right.
And here's, we'll throw out another shocking idea. The state must also use faith and right reason as a guide for what is considered help and protection.
Right.
Because there's a whole bunch of different ideas about what is considered helpful in regards to children, and with the power of the state behind them in that area, whether it's forced vaccinations or transhumanism or the sports problem or whatever. It comes from, all of that could come from a disordered understanding of faith and right reason.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's obvious in some instances that we are moving away from a society that is built on liberty to a society that is built on license.
Yes. Yes.
And the government is, liberty flows from the person, right? Liber even means, I think, child in Latin. Like it's got multiple meanings, right? Child, book, freedom, right? All of those things. But licentiousness, right? License truly is essentially somebody with authority saying that you can do something that they say that you wouldn't have the right to do if you didn't have that license, right? So commercial driver's license, for instance, I don't get to go out on the highway in a semi-trailer and drive a big rig unless I've proven to the state that I'm capable of doing that. Now we can argue whether or not that's a good or a bad, but when you restrict it for instances like that, maybe you can argue that it's a good. But when the license of the state begins to intrude upon the freedom of the human person to be who he or she was created to be, that is when we are going to start to run into very big problems, because it is at that moment that we recognize that the state is no longer the subsidiarity to us, but rather we have become beggars of licenses from the state, and they give to who they will. If you do what they want them to do, for instance, I mean, Europe is they're not even being quiet about this right now in terms of their dispensing of rights. Canada has not even become quiet about this. They say very boldly and very proudly, vaccinated people will have more rights and more freedoms. They say it very clearly. And so it's obvious to them and to the people who are living underneath them that the state now has become the primary cell of society, and families are there to serve the state. And that's really frightening, because it's very communist in its orientation. It's very much the antithesis of Divini Ilius Magistri.
Very, very much so. And so to help the state and the family navigate these boundaries and understanding, the church, who is also a society, has an indispensable role in calling all souls to Christ and the reception of the Holy Spirit, because it's the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, God within, it's God within me.
Right.
kind of idea that helps in negotiating that which is proper to the family and that which is proper to the state. Apart from grace, and I know people don't like to hear this in the realm of education because they're thinking, oh, what do we do with the public school situation? And I'll say, those public schools that I've observed who did a really beautiful job educating their family followed these principles. These are the Pope is going to talk about them, the Decalogue, right? These are written on the human soul. That's what Paul says. These are not coming up out 2000. They're inherent to man. Okay. So apart from grace, man is not capable of keeping the boundaries of order and knowledge in proper harmony. The singular pursuit of science and materialism without grace becomes yet another means to enslavement and misery. We do not, she mentioned that at the first get-go about STEM, and I couldn't agree with her more. And here's the statement. Every educational pursuit must be measured against the gospel. That's our measure,
Right.
as taught by the Lord. Those efforts that tend closer to his truth, so that's the measure. And so the things that tend closer to it will create immense blessings. It's not just a little bit. There'll be immense blessings for all. And the further away you get from it, the more of a disaster people will have on their hands.
Right.
Oh my gosh, we're at the end of our time here. That's what happens. Do you have a quick summary thought, and then we'll pick up with universities?
Yeah, I think that, you know, it just bears repeating that parents must reassert their natural and God-given prerogatives of being the primary educators of their children. They cannot abdicate that role because they do it at great cost to society and really to the church and, you know, to their own well-being.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. All right, my friends, we're going to pick up with universities. Till then, fides, Ratio.